guys, welcome back to Homesteading Hustle. Today I'm going to be bringing you an awesome collaboration hosted by Megan at Home with the Hursts. Now, she had come up with this great idea of having each of us do 5 things that you can make at home to help save money. I know money is a thing that we are all struggling with a little bit right now when it comes to inflation and the cost of goods. And so if we can bring you some good ideas, I think we can really help you. So the other awesome channels included in this collaboration are not only myself, but we have Megan with Home with the Hursts, we have Katy at Louisiana Cooking and Living, and then we also have Destiny at Simply Living Mama. I will link all of their channels down below so that you can check out their video in this collaboration as well. You're going to get a lot of great ideas. Again, if each of us provides you 5 things you can make to save money at home, you're going to get 20 awesome recipes and ideas for your home. Alright, so first up, we're going to make something that I've actually never made, but I've wanted to. And I have my little helper behind me here. She's not so little, she's as tall as me now. But she's going to help me today. We're going to make homemade marshmallows. Now, because we eat biblically clean, meaning we don't eat pork, we don't eat regular marshmallows. So, marshmallows themselves are not super expensive, but because we typically buy the kosher version. I guess technically they are virgin marshmallows, but the version of marshmallows is the kosher ones. And that means that they don't have pork in it. So if this is news to you, most gelatin is made from pork. And so anytime you see that on the back of a package and it's not specified as a different kind of gelatin, it is going to be a pork product. So typical marshmallows do have pork in them, and so we do not buy them. Today, we are going to be using a grass-fed, unflavored gelatin. This is a beef gelatin, and I've been wanting to buy this for so long, and I finally bought it. And this is actually a really great deal. This is, this is 16 ounces in here. We only need a little bit for this recipe. The recipe actually only calls for 2 tablespoons of gelatin. So we'll be able to make this recipe over and over again because other things that are in this recipe are things that you're already going to have in your pantry. So this is the way that you can save money, because if you've ever looked at the cost of dandies, they're not super cheap. And so this is going to be a great one for your household. Okay, so the recipe that I grabbed today is from Becky over at Acre Homestead. I have watched her video on this, but she also has it on her blog at scratchpantry.com. So this is her recipe. And again, I've never made this, but I've always wanted to make this. So I'm actually really excited about this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our large bowl and we're going to put the gelatin in there with the water, and we're going to get it to what's called bloom. And that is just activating your gelatin. So we're going to start with the 2 tablespoons plus 1 teaspoon of the gelatin. So 2 tablespoons plus 1 teaspoon of gelatin plus a 1/2 cup of water. She does not specify if this needs to be cold or room temp or warm water. I'm just going to go with cold water because I did see another recipe and she used cold water for that. Alright, so we have our 1 cup of cold water there, and then I'm going to have you come over and whisk this for me. So I'm just going to whisk it together and get all the lumps out and make sure that everything is really well incorporated. Okay, so the next part of the recipe is we're going to add our sugar and our corn syrup into a pot here. She says to use a heavy bottom pot, which I do have a small heavy bottom pot. That's probably so it doesn't scorch. So sugar will scorch really quickly and easily if you have it over not only too high of heat, but if it's like directly touching the heat. The nice thing about the heavy bottom pots is it creates that like little bit of an insulated layer, and it's best for like scalding milk or heating up sugar and creating syrups. So we're going to use 1.5 cup granulated sugar. So we have 1 cup and 1/2 cup. And then we need 1 cup of light corn syrup. Alright, so we got 1 cup of a light corn syrup here. If you do any kind of like holiday baking, you probably already have all of these ingredients besides the gelatin in your pantry, which I did because I like to make gosh, what is it that I use corn syrup for? Oh, it's those caramel corns that I make like in the winter time. It's so easy. You buy those like puff corn, and the caramel corn recipe is on the back, and it's so easy and so good. Alright, so we're going to take this over to the stove. We're going to keep that on here. We're going to stir it together. Once you give this a whisk, and we're going to keep it on the heat until it melts down and we're looking for 240 degrees in temperature. So once the granulated sugar starts melting, I'll start sticking a thermometer in there and we'll see if we can get the temp to where we need it. It says on the recipe that it takes around 10 minutes or so. I'm heating it up at just a medium heat right now. If we need to turn it up, we will, but I think that should be good.
Looks like glue.
Yeah, it really does kind of look like glue like this when it's all that texture. Okay, so we are definitely melted now. So I'm going to take the temperature here. She's been stirring it really well. I might turn it down a little bit. We are at, we're almost there, 240. That's what we needed at, 240. So now we officially have our syrup at the proper temperature. Everything is melted. Now it says we're going to go really quickly from this over to the gelatin, and we're going to mix it together. Okay, we're going to add in our vanilla super quick. We need 2 teaspoons of vanilla and stir that up. And I actually forgot to add the salt before. And so we need a 1/4 teaspoon salt. And we're just going to sprinkle a little bit in here and call it good. This is the kosher salt. Just a little bit of salt. Salt is really important in sweet things because it helps to cut that sweetness and really round out the flavor. So I don't want to miss that part of it. But now that this is fully melted at our proper temperature, I might have brought it down a few degrees with that adding in the vanilla. We're going to add it directly to our gelatin mixture here. And then it says to start beating it like right away. So we're going to whisk this in. So we don't have a stand mixer. We just have a hand mixer we're going to use here. And that's going to work just fine. So we're going to slowly incorporate it in. It's going to start melting everything. You want to get that going? We're going to turn the mixer on and start blending.
Yesterday, there was sun and there was rain. Beauty in the mundane. And as the light startled our eyes, we let go of disguise. Something in the air and a sparkly shimmer on our skin, restoring everything within.
Okay, so I think she's done mixing over here. So if you can see, I had put a little bit of, in the recipe it says a spray your dish. This is an 8x8 or 9x9 if you want them nice and thick, or it says in some of the other recipes I was looking at, you can make them in like 9x13 pans, but they're just going to be thinner, or you could double the recipe, I'm sure, and just make them however. Again, this is my first time that I've been doing it, so it's a little bit of an experiment on how big I want them. But it says to coat it in a non-stick cooking spray, like an unflavored one. The ones I have are olive oil and butter, and so I didn't want to transfer either of those flavors to the dish, so I actually just took a little bit of coconut oil with my fingers and spread it around, and then I sprinkled a little bit of powdered sugar in here, and that helps to create another layer of like coating so it doesn't stick and it comes out easy. This looks really cool. I'm excited to show you this. Look at this. So it's all like stringy almost, and like it definitely, like I think I have to work really fast right now and spread this in. So, all right, that is definitely marshmallowy. So I'm gonna very quickly grab this. Oh yeah, look at that. That is marshmallow right there.
100%.
Oh my gosh, I'm making a mess. Okay. It's gonna be on my face. Okay. All right, I'm gonna very quickly put this marshmallow mix into our pan, and it says to just tap it on the counter a few times to get rid of air bubbles. Smooth it out if needed, and then these need to sit for, it says, till morning. You slice them up and use them for whatever. It does say that you can coat them, and once you slice them, you coat them in a powdered sugar, and that helps prevent them from sticking to each other for storage. So I definitely will do that. So the next thing on our list is going to pair really awesomely with this marshmallow. And I'm excited to show you because we're going to put it all together at the very end. Next on our list is a hot cocoa mix. So this is going to be a dry cocoa mix made with just 5 ingredients. So this is something where you'll make a big batch of it, and then throughout the winter or however big of a family you have, maybe you go through it really quick. But you can utilize just a small portion of it for each cocoa mix. So we're not making individual servings, we're making a large batch, and then you can pull from that every time you want to make a hot cocoa. Now this is really nice because you avoid a lot of the preservatives that are in like a typical like hot cocoa packet. And actually, here's something interesting. The difference between hot cocoa and hot chocolate is hot cocoa is the powdered mix, and hot chocolate is actually typically like chocolate melted down and then mixed in with your hot liquid. So we are doing hot cocoa today. Okay, so this is literally just 5 ingredients. We're going to be using a non-fat dry milk. This is an instant like powdered milk. We're going to use cornstarch. We have powdered sugar. We have a cocoa powder and kosher salt. Now I actually had all of these items already in my pantry, so I didn't buy anything for this. And I haven't made hot cocoa mix in quite a while. Okay, so we're going to mix everything in this bowl, just a large bowl, and then we will put it into our storage reservoir. You can use like a very large mason jar. I'm actually going to use, here I'll show you real quick what I'll use. This is actually like one of those like coffee tins, and I wrote already on it the hot cocoa mix. I just wrote that in dry erase marker. There's a glare on it, and I also, what we're going to do with this is I put the measuring of how you're going to want to use it on here. I put that for easy access for the kids. So you're going to use 1/4 to 1/2 cup of this mixture per like 8 to 10 ounces. And obviously that can be give or take, do whatever works well for your taste buds, but that's kind of a general rule of thumb for this one. So we're going to use 2 cups of powdered sugar. Powdered sugar is nice for this recipe because it dissolves really easily, as opposed to granulated sugar, which sometimes takes a little while. And you have to have like really scorching hot liquid for that, where this, even just kind of a warm liquid will melt all of this very well together. So there's 2 cups of powdered sugar. Then we're going to do 1 cup of cocoa powder. Any cocoa powder will do here. You can use, this is just the Nestle Toll House one, but again, you can use like a Dutch process or whatever works best for you. We're going to use 1 cup of this. Get that in there. So we got 1 cup of the cocoa powder. And then we need 2.5 cups of powdered milk. All right, so we got 2.5 cups of powdered milk here. So we got 1, 2, 2.5. We have a little bit left in here. I actually am just going to toss that in because it's literally only like maybe another like 1/4 cup. There's no point in me saving that tiny little bit. So I'm just going to add that in there as well. Next is 2 teaspoons of cornstarch. So we have 1 and 2. There's that. And then 1 teaspoon of kosher salt. All right, there's all our ingredients, and we're going to just whisk this together. You want this really well mixed and get rid of all the lumps. And this is seriously it. And then we're just going to store this in our little container over to the side here and mix in accordingly to your hot liquid. Hot water or hot milk work really well for this. So both of them are really good. Hot milk is going to give you definitely like a richer flavor, and it's going to be maybe a little creamier too, depending on if you're using whole milk or skim milk or whatever. But milk is always going to bring out the flavor a little bit better. And that is it. Okay, so I did get my hands in there to actually kind of break up some of the little chunks, but now we're going to put it into our container here. She's going to give it one more little stir to make sure everything's all mixed together well. All right, good job. Oh, don't fling it. Careful, don't fling it. Did I fling it on you? I flung it on you. All right, let's scoop it into this container now. Ready? Yep, keep that in there. I'll give you the big scoop, and we're gonna scoop it in here. Okay? Good job. Good job. Okay, so now that we have that all filled up, it's ready to go. And actually, if you leave like a 1/4 cup scoop in there, I'll just use my broken one, stick that right in there, then it's ready to go. Okay, so sourdough does not have to be complicated. There's so many videos out there that talk about weighing your flour, weighing your starter, and making it this big complicated process, which makes it very intimidating for somebody who has a very busy schedule. They're a busy mom, they work outside the home, both of which describes me. I work outside the home, I'm a busy mom, but I want to bake myself and my family some delicious sourdough bread. And so, as I lean on that, so I have my starter here. I fed this last on, let's see, it is Friday today. I think I fed this last on Tuesday. It would have been Tuesday. I let it rise for a little bit on the counter, and then I put it in the fridge because I knew I wasn't going to be able to tend to it before I was going to go back to work. And so it has risen, and I'm going to show you it just in a second. I did just take it out this morning and just allow it to come to room temperature. So what are the misconceptions about sourdough? And I'm not saying these things are wrong. I'm just saying they make it more complicated than it needs to be. But one of the misconceptions that I've heard is to use your starter at its peak. And that means that you've fed your starter, it's been allowed to sit on the counter and rise, and it comes to like almost like a dome on the top when it's like getting all bubbly, and it comes to its peak, and that's its like highest rise point. And then from there, it starts to fall. And that's when it's fed on everything in the starter, in the container that it's in, and it is now going into like a little more of a dormant state, and it's going to become hungry. So as it's coming down is actually when I like to use my starter. So many places and many blogs and vlogs will say use it at its peak. But I actually use it just after its peak on its way back down, because what happens is when you go to put your starter in your dough for making the actual sourdough, you want that starter to feed on the flour and water that you're making your bread with. And that allows it to get a really nice rise to your bread. So if you use it at its peak, it's still going to work. But the thought process behind it is if you actually catch your starter just after it's done feeding, you're going to catch it at a point in time when it wants to eat again, and so it is going to thrive in your dough. Does that make sense? So when it comes to sitting around and waiting for your starter to hit just that right point, it doesn't have to be stressful like that. Just feed your starter. If you can't tend to it, put it in the fridge, take it back out. It really honestly is not as complicated as people make it to be. If it was, I would not do it. Really honestly, when it comes to sourdough, the activity of your starter, so you need a really active starter, and warmth are going to be super key in having a really nice loaf that can be done fairly quickly. Okay, so here is where we're at with the starter right now. You can see that it is actually, it has already reached its peak, and it is on its way back down. It's not crazy bubbly, but it is, like, if you could hear it, you could still hear the bubbles. It smells amazing. It has that really nice, like, sourdough smell. It's not, I've been really keeping up with my sourdough starter lately, and so I'm not letting it get super hungry, because then it just takes a lot longer to wake it up. And the best way to do that is to just feed it and put it in the fridge if you can't tend to it. Again, it does not have to be complicated. So this is right about where I want to utilize it for my dough. And here's what's really going to throw you for a loop. I'm not going to measure any of it. I'm not going to measure how much starter I put in. I'm not going to measure the flour. I'm not going to measure the water. We're going to do it all based on feel. And I know you're like, yeah, but I've never done it before, and, you know, I'm intimidated. I don't know what it's supposed to feel like. It's okay. It's okay. You will get it. It's not complicated. You will figure it out. Trust me. What I'm going to do is I'm literally just going to take some of this, and I'm just gonna I'm not gonna use a ton. The truth in the statement, a little leaven goes a long way, is incredibly true. Like, for real. A little leaven can rise multiple loaves of bread. So we're gonna use about that much, and I'm leaving some in there to feed. It's actually not a ton. I probably left like maybe 3/4 cup in there, which you don't have to leave that much in there to feed it as well. You can feed like the tiniest little remnants, and it'll be a very happy, active starter. I've done that many times. So, all right, my starter, I'm going to just set that aside over here. And here is the starter that I'm going to use. So this is maybe a 1/4 of a cup, maybe 1/3 of a cup. And then we're going to go put some water in it. Check this out. Okay, ignore my dishes in the sink, because yes, I need to do little dishes right now. But I really needed to make this video for you, so that's priority right now. So I just took this literally over to the sink, and I'm just going to turn my water on. And I'm going to try to make 2 small loaves here. So I'm going to just put water in here. I'm using cold water, maybe cool, maybe I'll warm it up a little bit. You don't want hot water. Hot water will kill your wild yeast in your starter. Let's see, I'm going to use probably that much. That looks soapy, it's not. That's just the pressure of the water reacting with the starter in there. This is probably, if I were to guess, this would be like 3.5 to 4 cups of water. Okay, so now that we have our water in here, we are going to add in our flour. So my red flour reservoir was empty, and so she likes to fill up my bread flour from the large pail. So I have a 5-gallon pail here of flour, and I transfer that regularly into like a smaller one that I keep in the cupboard here for easy access. And she likes to fill this up, so we're gonna let her do that. You did such a good job. High five, girlfriend. Yes, thank you. Rockstar status. Thank you. You're welcome. Okay, so now we have our bread flour. You can use whatever flour you want here. I do like to bake my sourdough with bread flour or all-purpose flour, but you can absolutely get creative with it. I just like the traditional flavor, and my family likes the traditional flavor of a simple white flour, but you can get creative here. So I'm going to use this only to scoop it, not to measure it. This is one of those old school measuring cups because I love like vintage things like this. I don't even know if it's accurate. I haven't even checked it out, but I just kind of use this to scoop it in. I'm not actually measuring it, but we can get a rough estimate, I guess, if you want. So we're going to add in some flour. You see that? Okay, so we're just going to add in a bunch of flour. So keep in mind, you can always add more, but you can take out. If you get it too tight, you're going to have to add more water. So, trying to make quiet videos in this house doesn't work, so. Alright, so we're going to start with that. I'm going to grab my dough whisk. That's this handy little dandy guy. And we're just going to, you don't have to have one of these. I got one of these much later after I started my sourdough journey. It's not necessary, but it is very handy. You can use whatever you want to mix it with. So we're going to get it, we're going to mix it up. So if you've ever heard people talking about like hydration of sourdough, so I've never formally, like properly measured the hydration of my sourdough, but here's a good indication. So typical sourdough is like a lower hydration, which means that you're going to have a more firm dough because it's easier to work with. The looser your dough is, the more hydrated the dough is, the harder it is to work with and is actually more reserved for like very advanced bakers. So what you're going to look for here, especially if this is one of your first times trying this or if this is just a different method that you want to try, definitely go for a little bit more of a stiff dough. As your dough sits and autolyses, which is the first bit of time that you allow your dough to sit, it's going to absorb the water. The flour is going to absorb the water and it's going to become more loose. So you actually want to create it a little bit tighter than you think. So we're going to keep mixing it here. I'm actually going to bring you a little closer so you can see. The lighting in my kitchen is terrible, but so we're going to get this as mixed as possible and then we'll decide if we're going to add more in there. So I really want to get a nice shot for you. I have this weird shadow that's causing darkness on the screen, but I'm just going to roll with it here. Okay, so this is still very loose. So it still has a lot of moisture in it, which obviously you want moisture in it, but I almost want it to not feel like it's going to be able to mix. So we're going to add a little bit more flour. Again, I'm not measuring, just a little bit at a time. Let's see here. I'm going to add even a little bit more than that. Now, if you have a nice big bowl to do your starter in, that's excellent. I don't. I actually broke mine because I was not smart and I put like screaming, piping hot turkey stock in a glass bowl, my beautiful glass like beveled bowl that I used to have, and it shattered on the spot. I was really, really sad, and that was my biggest bowl. Since then, this has been my backup bowl. I got this at the local vintage shop, in which I love, like vintage like thrift shops or like antique stores. They're so fun to me. So this was made by somebody at one point, but it seems to be old. But I love it because it has this like little lip on the edge, which catches, like if I want to put the cover over this, it catches like perfectly on that lip, and I love that. So, okay, so this is still, it's still a bit wet. I'm going to add a little bit more. Again, I want it to feel like it almost won't mix together, because as it sits, it's going to hydrate. All right, this, I think we're getting there now. So definitely don't need to add more water. We are going to allow this to autolyse. And that is what is going to bring our dough to just the right texture that we want it for some stretch and folds. Okay, so I don't know if you can tell here, but now it's a really rough, shaggy dough. There's bits of like dry flour in there. It almost seems like it's not going to mix. That's where I want it. Okay, I'm just going to leave it. So we're going to take as much of the dough off of here as possible. Okay, so now I can get it off my fingers. Now the next step is to add in salt. Maybe if I can get it out of the light there. So now I'm going to add salt. I'm not measuring the salt. For this amount of dough, because this is probably, if I were to look at this and measure how many like cups of dough this is probably 5 or 6 cups of dough, maybe. I'm going to estimate like maybe 2 tablespoons of like a kosher salt. You like a big granule salt for this. I think it mixes well without over salting. So I use either just the Morton kosher salt, or Redmond's Real Salt has a lovely kosher salt. I love Redmond's Real Salt, by the way. It like, if you just like take a lick of it, it's so tasty. There's something special about it, not gonna lie. But we're just gonna use this today. The Redmond's Real Salt does have like different colored granules, which might not be visually appealing in a loaf of sourdough, because you will kind of see some of those little specks. But I don't mind, but I'm just going to use this today. So we're just going to estimate, you know what, I'll just use my palm. Usually like a palmful is about a tablespoon. So depending on how big your palm is. I kind of have big hands. And we're just going to sprinkle it on top. We're gonna do about 2 of those. Okay, so now we're gonna do the Oddies, and what I'm gonna do is cover this and just let it sit. I'm literally not gonna touch it, not for about at least 30 minutes, but really the time intervals also, whenever I think of it next, which probably will be anywhere between the next 30 minutes and an hour. We'll see.
Maybe I want to sit down. I want to sit down.
Get your little fingers out of there. Okay, so it has been officially probably about an hour since I first put this dough together, and we're going to do our first set of stretch and folds. Now, we have no gluten development yet from any stretch and folds, so it's going to be just really still kind of shaggy, still kind of loose, but we're going to just work around the bowl like this by pulling the edge over itself. We're literally just grabbing the edge, stretching it a little bit, and folding it over itself. As you go around the bowl a few times, you will notice that I'm starting to wiggle it a little bit and then making sure I'm scraping the bottom and getting any dry flour out of there. But as I kind of wiggle it, I kind of flop it over itself, and that forces that fold a little bit. So now we just did that set. I'm going to cover it, and we will come back to this again next time I think about it, maybe in an hour or so. Okay, we're back, and once again, we're going to stretch and fold the same way we did it before. And if you notice here, and I do this every time, I do get my hand a little bit wet. And what that does is allows me to just kind of like get around the outside without it sticking to me very much. And it doesn't incorporate very much water in, so you don't have to worry about it overhydrating your dough. I just get my hands barely damp, and it just helps the process. So now you're going to feel a little more of that gluten starting to form. It's going to feel tighter, quicker, and because it's sitting for a little bit, it's going to have a little bit of a bounce to it, so that some of that fermentation is happening. You're starting to develop a lot of stuff going on in this delicious sourdough loaf. Once you go around a few times, I do force the stretch a little bit. I place my hand there and hold the top while I stretch the other side. I have always done this, and it just really helps that formation. When it's nice and bouncy like that, it's a good way to keep it going. Okay, here we are with number 3 for stretch and fold. And as it sits, so each of these has been about an hour apart, and that's just because that's when I'm thinking about it. I walk by it, I'm like, oh, it's probably time for that. My kitchen is kind of warm today, and so I am getting a decent amount of rise on this in between these folds, but it is totally fine because we have not done the bulk ferment yet. So we're just going to keep stretching and folding, continue to repeat the same process, and we're forming that gluten. It's going to be tighter and tighter, easier to flop over itself, and I won't have to do as many around the bowl. And I don't have a typical amount of stretch and folds I do as far as each round or how many times each round I go. It is really honestly just depending on the night, depending on my time, depending on when I think about it. I would say the minimum I've done is probably like 2 rounds of that, and I'd go around the bowl until I can't. And the most I've probably done is like 5 rounds of that. So it really can vary. You can do, I don't know if you can overwork it with your hand. If you're using like a hand mixer for something like this, you definitely could, but I don't think you can with your own hands. I mean, you'd have to be doing it all day to make it too much, because once it starts to get into the bulk fermentation stage where it's been sitting for a really long period of time, then you want to just let it build those bubbles and develop naturally. Okay, so that last stretch and fold was the last one for the night. Now it is the next morning, and I am presetting my oven to 450 degrees. I am not putting these in bannetins. I'm literally just going to bake them off. I did not do a cold ferment, which is what many times, I've done that many times, many times. But you don't absolutely have to. I want this bread for the morning, and so I'm going to bake this off right away. So the cold ferment does help to allow it to like build that strong sourdough flavor that we know. But I'm just going to have a little bit more of a mild sourdough flavor when you bake it off right away rather than letting it cold ferment. Now, I will be honest here, this is a little bit over fermented. And that is strictly because we got to bed kind of late and I was kind of lazy, and that's why I'm in my pajamas here. And so I'm literally baking this in my pajamas for you. It's so professional. It's great. But this is real life. This is the busy mom sourdough. This is just what I do. It's how I get it done, how I make it happen, and it turns out delicious majority of the time. So as I'm going around the bowl here, I'm not trying to like stretch and fold and like compress these bubbles that have been forming in here. I'm just trying to get it out of this bowl without it being a massive mess. Now, because I did slightly over ferment it, and that just means I let it sit just a little bit too long on the counter. It probably sat an extra like 2 hours longer than it should have. And that is just going to make it a little more difficult for me to work with, but it's totally fine. And you can tell that it is very well fermented. It rose very well in here. I'm going to divide it in two. We're going to make 2 loaves here. And I'm just going to do a super simple shaping on this. I'm going to fold in the sides and I'm just going to kind of like roll it into itself. I'm trying not to get flour on the inside of this loaf. You can have the flour on the outside. Try not to get very much on the inside at this point because you've already gotten all the flour in that you want, and it will mess with your crumb on the inside if you get flour on the inside at this point. So I'm trying to keep it on the outside just to create a little bit of a barrier. And what I do to just kind of shape this on the counter is I just kind of make sure that there's not a lot of flour underneath it, and I'm just like sliding it and allowing the top to stretch, and that creates a little bit of a skin on the top. Now, because I did not cold ferment this, it is not going to have a tight skin that you can score really pretty. And if it wasn't over fermented, I could create a nice score on the top here, just like a simple expansion score. But the score that I'm going to show you right here, it'll expose that it's over fermented. Here, you can watch real quick. It's just a quick little score, and this is a really shallow expansion score. And here's that first loaf baked off, and I'm going to do this one more time with the other loaf and really just repeat that process. And did you hear how beautiful that crust sounds? Oh my gosh, it's so lovely. That crispy, crunchy outer layer when it first comes out is just dreamy. I seriously love that sound. It's so fun. So I'm literally just repeating the same thing with this loaf. I'm going to get it onto, so you can just put it on parchment if you want. If you don't have like one of these little like silicone baking mats, totally fine. Put it on parchment, put it in your pan. I don't preheat this pan that I'm using. I just have like one of those really thin soup pots I'm using. If you have a really thick Dutch oven, like a cast iron or something like that, you do want to preheat that. You do want this going in and experiencing heat right away. That's going to help you get a nice rise on your loaf, especially if you have, a really well fermented loaf. You're going to get the best rise the faster it can be exposed to really high heat. Does that make sense? So I do kind of like press the side of this loaf every once in a while just because I think the jiggle that it provides is so funny. I just think it's satisfying as a baker. I just find that really fun. Anyways, I'm going to scoop this onto my silicone mat and I will give it just a brief little score. Again, these are not a fancy scoring. These are just kind of rustic loaves. This isn't anything fancy. We are just making bread because we want to eat the bread. I do make fun, fancy loaves sometimes too, and I've posted those on my Instagram. But this is kind of more of what I do more regularly. Let's just eat some good bread, right? Okay, so usually with sourdough, you want to make sure it cools completely before you cut into it. This is almost cooled completely, but I just couldn't wait any longer. I was dying to get into it. And so I am busting into this sucker so we can make some sourdough toast for breakfast. I'm going to make something really delicious a little bit later on in this video with this, and you're gonna love it. Look at how pretty that crumb is. It turned out really great. It is a little bit of a heavier loaf, and again, because I said it's slightly over fermented, but this makes amazing toast and is seriously so good. The kids and I and my husband enjoyed this thoroughly that morning for breakfast. Okay, next on our list of things to make to save money at home is I'm gonna make quick mozzarella cheese. And this is something, is mozzarella cheese super expensive? No, but this is really fresh mozzarella, and when you buy like a gourmet cheese, it can be more expensive. I have a really great supplier for raw milk, and so I actually only pay like $3 a gallon, which is really, really good. So that might not be what you can find locally near you. And you can make cheese with grocery store milk that is pasteurized, but you don't want ultra pasteurized. So there's something about the process of the ultra pasteurization that prevents the ability from it to separate the curds and whey. That's just what I heard on another video. I have not actually tried it. So, but regular pasteurized milk that you can buy in the store does work for mozzarella cheese. But this is raw milk, and we're gonna use that today. I have made an entire video actually doing this before, and so I'm just gonna do the quick version today. If you want a little more detailed or like a slower process, I'll link that video down below for you. But it's seriously, mozzarella cheese is so easy to make, and there's nothing like fresh homemade anything. Okay, so first step, we're just gonna make a half gallon here, and I'm just gonna pour it into, I have a heavy bottom pot here. That is what I've always used, and that just seems to work really well. So we're gonna pour our milk in there. This milk, so you can use like fresh raw milk, or it's a great way to use up milk that has kind of been sitting in the fridge for a couple weeks. This one is probably about 2 weeks old. And so milk, the nice thing about raw milk is that it doesn't really go bad, it just changes. And so it does have a little bit of a sourness to it, but nothing crazy. It just kind of turns, it has like a buttermilk flavor to it. And so it's great for cheese making. So we're gonna turn this on, let's see, I'm gonna turn it on to like medium high, which is like a 7 if you have numbers on there. And we're gonna bring this temperature up to about 110 degrees. And so once it comes up to 110 degrees, we are going to add in about 7 tablespoons of just a white distilled vinegar. And that's literally the only 2 ingredients. And what the vinegar is going to do is it's going to help the curds separate from the whey. And that is where we get our cheese. And that's all we need. And then we're going to drain it off, we're going to stretch it, and we're going to add salt to it. And it turns into delicious, fresh mozzarella cheese. All right, so when we measure out 7 tablespoons into just another measuring cup, it looks like it's about 1/3 to 1/2 cup. So I think a good rule of thumb would probably be 1/2 cup of vinegar to 1/2 gallon of milk. I think that's going to be a good ratio for you. If you are doing a full gallon of milk, just do a whole cup of vinegar. So we're gonna add in this vinegar. I actually like to create a little bit of a vortex happening in here just so it's already moving when I pour it in. We're gonna pour the vinegar in, and then we're not going to stir this vigorously. We're literally just going to make sure that it incorporates in. Maybe pull it in from the sides a little bit. And then we're gonna walk away for like 5 minutes and just let it sit. You can already see it's starting to separate. That is already cheese forming from the curds. And this is what it looks like up close. You can see that it's starting to separate. And in just a few minutes, literally about 5 minutes, we're going to pull all the curds out, and we're going to have the whey and the vinegar left in the pot, and we'll have the curds over to the side, and we will drain them, and then we're going to stretch them, rinse them, and we're going to salt them a little bit, and they'll be ready for a delicious meal in just a few minutes. All right, so first what we're going to do is we're going to take a spoon and just try to push the curds over to one side and get them to stick to each other. So if you can kind of get them all in one spot, they'll come out much easier because your temperature is it should be a little bit of a melting stage right now. And so they are going to want to be a little stringy. Okay, so now with like dual spoons, or if you have one of those really big spider spoons, those would work really well. But I'm going to try to scoop as much as I can over to this strainer. And this is going to automatically start to drain the vinegar and the whey off, and it's going to allow it to come down to temperature so that we can rinse it and keep it all together. See that? That's our cheese. I have heard that you can reprocess the same way and get even more out of it. I have not done that. I usually bring this whey vinegar mixture actually out to my chickens. It's a really good way to get them some probiotics and just some healthy, just some gut healthy stuff. I have also, which I've made a video on, I have actually fermented chicken feed in this, and it's a really, really great way to not only stretch the dollar on chicken food, but it really provides a nourishing meal for them, because not only does it break down the outer layer of the grain and allow it to be more bioavailable for them, but it gives them that little boost of probiotics that is already in the whey and the vinegar. Okay, so what we're going to do is just kind of use utensils, because it still might be warm, and we're just going to kind of like fold it over itself and try to drain as much of that whey vinegar mixture off as we can. You can actually like buy gloves, or if you have like a rubber glove that's meant to like block out temperature, like heat, you can definitely use a rubber glove for this, and that's what a lot of cheesemakers will do. They have special gloves that they use so they can use their hands. I am going to get my hands in here. I don't have those gloves, but I'm just going to tough through it once I need to rinse this here. Try to get as much of that out as you can. Okay, so now that our cheese is mostly drained of the whey, you can still squeeze some of it out. We're going to rinse it. We have really hot water here, and I'm just going to stick it in there for a second, and we're going to pull it out, and we're going to rinse it a little bit, and then we're going to start to stretch it. Now we want this water to be really nice and hot. And then we're going to start to pull it a little bit and just get some stretching going on. It's okay if we have some of that in there, because some of that is flavor, and it's going to give us that like a richer flavor. But if you leave too much whey in there, it does spoil faster. Some people rinse theirs like under hot water directly under the faucet. I'm not going to do that. I usually don't do that. I usually use it fast enough where it's not an issue for storing long term. And if your temperature isn't hot enough for it to stretch well, then you might want to drain it and get it even hotter. So as I'm finishing up with this mozzarella cheese, you can see it's nice and hot. It's a bit stringy there. That's a really great way to determine if it's hot enough to stretch really well. You want it to have a nice stretch to it and not be separating or breaking as you're pulling it, but this has a nice stretch. It's almost like taffy. So as I'm stretching, I'm adding some of this kosher salt to it. And you can definitely, you can be pretty liberal with this salt. It's completely up to you. Salt is definitely what's going to bring out the flavor, because mozzarella is a very mild flavored cheese. But the vinegar in there does bring a little bit of flavor to it, especially if you didn't completely rinse it out. But overall, this is a really lovely cheese, so easy. And I create just like this little ball by forming a little bit of a skin on the edges by tucking it underneath itself. And there's a beautiful little ball of mozzarella. And I am actually going to wrap this in plastic wrap and I will store it on the counter just for a little bit. I'm gonna actually get a really delicious meal going here for you. We're gonna make a homemade grilled cheese with that sourdough that we made today, and we're gonna use the mozzarella cheese, and it's going to be so epic. I seriously hope that you'll stick around to watch this and you'll feel inspired to make yourself something completely homemade and delicious from scratch that can save you money in the long run. Now, I still have a few more things here for you. One of them is the number one thing that I think would be amazing for you to have on your homestead or in your home. And I'll have that coming up for you in just a moment. But first, the grilled cheese. Okay, so it's time for number one on our list. And the best thing about this number one way that you can save money on your homestead or at your home, and you don't even have to make it. It's pretty awesome. Let's go check it out. Ladies, are you cooking eggs in here? Are you ladies cooking eggs in here? Yes, you do have to deal with poop. But fresh chicken eggs is an amazing way to save money in your home. And chickens are accepted almost anywhere now. You can have a backyard flock of like 6 in most like rural areas. I can't say that word. Rural areas. And if you live on some acreage, you can have tons of chickens. We currently have about 45. We've had up to like 70 some chickens before. And farm fresh eggs, it's amazing. Not only do you save money on eggs in the long run, obviously you have to have a coop and you have to feed them, but if you allow them to free range, they get a ton of bugs and nutrients. They are super good at cleaning up like scraps. If you have like fresh produce and that kind of stuff, you can save a lot of money with just giving chickens scraps as far as feeding them. And honestly, they're incredibly easy to care for. So if you've ever thought about chickens, let this be your sign that you should get some chickens, because not only do they provide eggs continuously for you, obviously look into breeds that are high production. I can give you more information on that. I do have some videos like that on my channel, but I'm more than happy to answer questions about chickens. We've had chickens for almost 10 years now, and this is like our prime favorite focus ever on our homestead. We love chickens. They're hilarious, entertaining. They provide food. They are an easy animal, for real. Plus, if you have kids, they love to help grab eggs. Oops, got that on the floor. Here, can you put those in the egg basket? Actually, you know what? I'll set it here because there's a chicken in there. You put them in there? Thank you. Be gentle. And to seal the deal, not only can you save money by getting chickens, you can actually make a profit. We actually sell our chicken eggs for $5 a dozen, and it provides enough money to pay for their food. So we actually, at this point, get almost completely free eggs for our family. So I highly, highly recommend getting chickens. That is my #1 way for you to save money and make something on your homestead, and you don't even have to make it. The chickens do it. Should we go check the other coop?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go check the other coop. You gonna hold that? Are you going in there?
Yeah.
Okay, crawl in there.
Gonna stay in this moment. Gonna lay here on the grass. I don't need to feel lonely. I am finally home at last. And I don't mind being gone on adventures for a while. No, no. 'Cause the best thing about it is I know I'm coming back. Oh, oh.
These are the ingredients. This is the chef. Vanilla extract. This is the good gelatin. This is the sugar. More sugar. Salt. Corn syrup. No, we're not making pancakes. This is the secret recipe. Don't look. The measuring cups. And this is the pan that we're gonna be using. Not like it's actually a pan. And this is the oven that they're gonna go in. This is the stove that we cook on. This is the fridge that we live in. This is butter.
Okay.
This is real milk. This is our 2 fish. This is our camera. And this is the phone that we use. Let's get baking.
Really? Oh. I'm not cool enough to know what any of these things are.